Hey there, class. This is Mr. Pritz. We are going to take a brief look at the book of Joshua. This is the first book in our group of books that we are calling the historical books. You can think of the book of Joshua as the sequel to the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Bible. So a lot has happened in the first 5 books of the Bible. And if you noticed, the tempo has been pretty fast. A huge portion of history was covered very quickly in the Pentateuch. But as the books went on, you also see that things are beginning to slow down. We spend more time with Moses and the Israelites as they labor on towards the Promised Land, rather than zooming by decades and mere sentences. After Moses dies, the reins are now passed on to Joshua. It's time for a new leader to actually settle Israel into their promised home. So let's take a look at the purpose of this book. So this book is a conclusion of God's promises made back in Exodus. God said he would deliver his people from slavery and settle them in a new and abundant land. In Joshua, that final part of the promise is realized as Israel settles into this promised land. This book gives a permanent setting for the rest of the Bible. Have you ever stopped to think about how central the physical land of Israel is to the whole Bible? This is where everything happens. The Old and New Testament, from here on out, this place will continue to represent many spiritual truths and realities inside the narrative. There are 4 major movements within the narrative of the book of Joshua. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at these 4 movements. The first movement, Joshua takes over leadership of Israel. Joshua is a new leader. He's a younger man than Moses, and he's learning to obey God in this new role. In contrast to Moses, he's a military leader. Moses was more of a spiritual leader. Moses was to deliver the people to the land. Joshua is to conquer the land. The second movement, the battles with the Canaanites and other inhabitants. We have to remember this is an epic narrative. Observe the details. Pay very close attention to how the narrative unfolds. Notice God's central position as decider of the outcomes of battles. Importance of doing what God says. Foreshadowing of later failures when they don't do what they're supposed to. We start to see a cycle form in the people of Israel. That cycle is obeying God, things go well for you. Disobeying God, things do not go well for you. The dividing up of the land. Israel's tribes settle into their lands. We have the institution of the Levitical priesthood. That's the priesthood that is beginning to be formed in the book of Deuteronomy, in Leviticus, and then finally coming to fruition as they settle in a new land. There's peace and rest after a long journey. Think of how long the people were in slavery and how long that journey was to get to the promised land. And Joshua has a final speech in the 4th movement. Similar to Moses, as his life ended, he gave closing words to the people of Israel. What has a man who's walked with God as a leader learned in his life? What does he value most important after all that he's done? Those are a few questions we're going to be asking as we analyze Joshua's final speech in the closing portion of this book. And some tips for reading the book of Joshua. This book is primarily historical, narrative, or epic. That means it's telling us the story of what happened and is inviting us in to use our imagination to share in the experience of what happened. These stories are being told for a purpose, which means there are things we're supposed to see and aspire to imitate and things we're supposed to revile. So we are going to take a look at the book of Joshua in class together. We're going to pull out themes, motifs, symbolism, repetition, and we are going to specifically analyze the character of Joshua as he leads the people into the promised land.